Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. ¿Cómo están? How are you doing? My name is Paula Torrado, and I am the Air and Toxics Policy Analyst at Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles and the Change Coalition Coordinator, Californians for a Healthy and Green Economy. Soy la analista de políticas de aire y tóxicos de la organización Médicos por la Responsabilidad Social de Los Ángeles y la coordinadora de la coalición Change, Californianos por una Economía Verde y Saludable. I am currently doing consecutive interpretation before we start the meeting. Estoy haciendo una interpretación consecutiva antes de que comencemos la reunión. We are here with our language justice team, Alexia and Katja from Antena, Los Angeles. Estamos aquí con nuestro equipo de la justicia del lenguaje, Alexia y Katja, del grupo Antena, Los Angeles. They will be conducting today's interpretation for the meeting, and we're very thankful to them for being here with us. Ellos llevarán a cabo la interpretación para la reunión de hoy y estamos muy agradecidos con ellos por estar aquí con nosotros. So for those of you who will listen to the meeting in Spanish, you will have to click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom so you can choose Spanish. And once you do that, you will then enable mute original audio so you can only listen to the meeting in Spanish. Para aquellos de ustedes que van a escuchar la reunión en español, hagan clic en el botón de interpretación y elijan el idioma español. También deben elegir silenciar el audio original para que de esta manera solamente escuchen a la reunión en español. Now go ahead, please, for those of you who are listening to the meeting in Spanish, go ahead and click on the interpretation button so that you can listen, so that you can transfer to the Spanish channel. Ahora sí, para todos los que van a escuchar la reunión en español, por favor, elija su idioma preferido y continuaremos la reunión en interpretación simultánea. And we're going to give folks a few seconds. To do that. Okay. And give me 1 second so I can start the interpretation. Un momento, por favor. Ok, interpretación ya está disponible, así que por favor escojan su idioma preferido. So interpretation is enabled, so please choose your preferred language. Okay, wonderful. So thank you all for being here with us today. Hopefully that song set you up for today's meeting and made you feel energized and in sync with today's topic. A few quick reminders on technology. If you're having connectivity issues, we recommend you to switch to your phone audio to make sure that your internet doesn't interrupt today's meeting for you. So you can click the arrow in between mute and unmute, and then choose leave computer audio so that then you can link your phone to your computer audio by following these instructions. Similarly, if you call in today's meeting, and you also have the computer for the visuals, we recommend you that you link your phone audio to your computer. So by the time we go into breakout rooms and we have more conversations for today's meeting, I can recognize your computer and your phone audio. So you can follow these instructions as well by clicking the arrow in between unmute and mute. You can select switch to phone audio, and then you can dial in any of the numbers that show up in your Zoom. That way you can connect both of your phone audio and your computer audio. So thank you very much again. I'm personally super excited about today's opportunity to learn from environmental justice movement leaders, have a conversation with them, and deepen our understanding of their importance of history and moving forward. And I'm thankful as well for PSR-LA, Change, and EJHA for working collaboratively and putting this training together to ground all of our work in the importance of environmental justice history to build a unified movement towards decarbonizing, detoxifying, and democratizing our economy. So as we're setting the intentions for today's meeting, I wanted all of you to take a deep breath with me. I know that we're anxious, that given the unprecedented times, we're busy and we have a lot of work, and we are experiencing all of these things very differently. So I'll welcome you to take a deep breath with me. 1, 2, 3. And hopefully all of that anxiety and stress leaves out this space and you can settle in today's meeting. We're asking you for you to be present, to bring your whole self and all of your experiences. We ask you to listen actively, respect each other and appreciate each other's experiences, and similarly to hold value for everything that is shared today, especially as we all go through different experiences during the uncertain times of COVID-19, but more importantly, during the mass uprising all across the nation for the continued fight to end systemic racism. But in order to uproot environmental and systemic racism, we need to do the honest and righteous work, the comfortable work, which starts with self-examination and to listen to those whose lives are different from our own. And this work ends with justice, compassion, and empathy that manifests itself in our work and most importantly in our lives. And that being said, I'll remind you of today's community agreements for the meeting. So together we know a lot, alone we don't know at all. Do your best, be curious and respectful, uphold what's confidential, what we learn lives here, what we say stays here. Take space and make space, and lean into discomfort, because that's how we grow and that's how we learn. So we encourage you as well to interact over the chat, send some love to our environmental justice leaders, our keynote speakers, and show them, ask them questions, and please interact over the chat. So I'll introduce you to today's training leads and organizers. So this training came together in collaboration with the Environmental Justice Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform, Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles, and the Californians for a Healthy and Green Economy Coalition. So very quickly, PSR-LA is an environmental health organization that recognizes how the physical and social environment oftentimes determines health outcomes. And PSR-LA advocates for policies and practices that improve public health, eliminate nuclear and environmental threats, and address health disparities with the environmental justice and precautionary principles at the center of policy advocacy. And the Change Coalition is a diversified coalition with environmental justice and environmental health and grassroots groups, which mission is to fundamentally shift the paradigm of toxic chemicals management in California to one that is centered in environmental justice and has a collective vision for economically just and environmentally healthy communities in California. And with that being said, I'll pass it to Stephanie, who will share a little bit more about EJHA and will introduce us to our first keynote speaker.
Great, Paula, thank you so much. And thank you for all the hard work that you've put into this exciting training. I'm very excited about it too. The Environmental Justice Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform, I'm gonna drop a little bit about EJHA in the chat. Environmental Justice Health Alliance, or EJHA for short, is a national network of grassroots environmental and economic justice organizations and advocates who are primarily located in communities that are disproportionately burdened by a legacy of toxic chemicals and ongoing exposure to polluting facilities and toxic chemicals. The EJHA network model very importantly, features leadership by, of, and for grassroots communities, led from the bottom up. And with that said, I'm excited to introduce, for I think his first or second time ever on Zoom, our amazing EJ historian, Mr. Richard Moore, who is the co-director of the Los Jardines Institute in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or the Gardens Institute in English. I also have the pleasure of working with Richard as the national co-coordinator of the Environmental Justice Health Alliance. He's also currently the chair of the NEJAC, the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the EPA. And Richard is also a founding member and board member of the Just Transition Alliance, and previously served for almost 20 years as the director of the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, and for 12 years before that as the lead organizer at the Southwest Organizing Project. And Richard has served on so many local, national, statewide boards and commissions that I can't even mention them all here because it would take up all his time. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Richard. I asked you to unmute. Oh, perfect.
All right, I just wanted to, can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. My coach this morning, or my mentor this morning, one of my many mentors, we just went through this class this morning on how to do the Zoom and how to get all these things connected up. And I just really wanted to appreciate our sisters and brothers, our young sisters and brothers, and also our seniors and our elders and others that are on this call today. As was mentioned, my name is Richard Moore. Again, I would like to give special attention to the interpreters. Thank you very much. Many times, as we say in the environmental and economic justice movement, we talk about things, we think about things, but we don't give gratitude to our sisters and brothers that make the work possible for us to be able to do what we're doing today. So special attention and thank yous to the interpreters. Stephanie said, my name is Richard Moore. I'm calling in from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Just to run through this, I am co-coordinator of Los Jardines Institute in English. It's the Gardens Institute. And so we work on several issues here at Los Jardines, one being agriculture. Many of our sisters and brothers are in the fields right outside of where I am, working on the fields and harvesting and doing the necessary work to put healthy and quality food back in the hands of our people. So we do agriculture. We are also a part and a founding member of a farmers cooperative. There's over 37 ally farms here in Albuquerque that are affiliated to our agricultural cooperative. We work on literacy, the intersections between children, particularly younger children, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and some of the others. So we run a lot of children's programming here. And many of our youth and others work with our children in terms of listening to them, sharing with them, and then doing the kind of necessary things that's possible for us to be able to educate ourselves, but also educate our younger sisters and brothers. We also work on, so it's agriculture, literacy, and the intersections between environmental and economic justice. So I just wanted to begin just by giving some what I'll call bullet points to some of the history of the environmental and economic justice movement. I think it's very, very important for us to know and to realize that before the first convening, the first national convening in Washington, D.C., that obviously there was hundreds upon hundreds of organizations that were working on both environmental and in some cases economic, and many cases economic or environmental issues in their community. So that's very broadly spanned. It could be landfills, slaughterhouses, dog food companies, nuclear storage facilities, I mean, on and on and on, both in rural communities and in urban communities. So just lifting that up right quick, then it's important for us to understand before the first National People of Color Leadership Forum that took place in Washington, D.C. in 1991, that many of us had been and were working on immigration issues. We were networking with each other, not only in the region, but by also doing binational networking because The state that I'm calling in from, obviously from a historical perspective, was a part of the country of Mexico, and that interaction between our sisters and brothers up and down the Mexico-U.S. border has been very, very, very crucial to our work. So at the first People of Color Summit, all the pre-work that was done to prep us up, some may know this, but the first People of Color Summit was actually to take place in 1990. And so based upon that, we had many of us from the grassroots communities had asked, because there was quite a large need to make sure that we were prepared and that our sisters and brothers and communities throughout this country were prepared for their attendance at the first People of Color Summit. Some couple of key moments within that was hundreds upon hundreds of people of color, African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asian Pacific Islander grassroots EJ groups that came together in Washington, D.C. There's several things that should be mentioned in this short historical piece. One is, this is where we redefined environmentalism and conservationism. And so many of you may know that in that definition, we redefined it as where we work, where we live, where we play, where we pray, and where we go to school or where we learn. Those pieces are very crucial for us to understand, because then many would say, not only did we open up the questions of environmental injustice, but we also were very clear about environmental racism and the class distinctions between race and class. That was very, very important for this convening. As many of you also know, then that's where we established the principles of environmental justice, and that as much of our work was done in a very, very collective way. We broke into small groups. We had large groups. We would bring those large group discussions back to the small groups, and then out of that, over a couple of days of being together, the principles were not only established, but were adopted by those that participated in the first People of Color Summit. So that's important for us to really know. I mean, I think that for many of us that been a part of these processes, it always kinds of amazes us, because some would say someday life began when we got involved. And I think all of you that are participating here may understand what that means. Life for many of us began hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years before we were born. And so that connection, that history, that culture, and everything else that brought us to this table is extremely important, and continues to be extremely important. As we run through that, then we can see that well, I'll just skip down a couple of points here right quick. What's referred to as the letters to the group of 10. We had been having interaction, both positively and negatively, with a lot of the national green groups. And so it was decided that a letter needed to be sent to what was referred to the group of 10. Many of you know those. I won't run all through them. The Wilderness Society, Wildlife Federation, Sierra Club, and then there's a longer list of those groups. And so we very clearly laid out in that letter some of the positive things, but some of the negative things that were taking place by decisions being made without our sisters and brothers being at the table to participate in those decisions and the after results of what would took place if we were not sitting at the table. I just want to backtrack just for a quick second what's referred to on the letter from the group of 10, because as we were beginning to do this, we were contacted by a group out of Louisiana, what's referred to as Cancer Alley. Those sisters and brothers that were organizing from New Orleans to Baton Rouge by the tenants' rights organization there, and they had asked us. I just want to say, when we're looking at this history, it's important to identify the Gulf Coast Tenants Leadership Development Project under the leadership, the directorship at that point of Brother Pat Bryan, and they were talking about sending a letter to what was referred to as the group of 10. If you look at that original letter, then you'll see primarily what's being in some cases discussed today were brought up many, many, many years ago. That letter particularly looked at race in terms of those that were in leadership of these organizations, those that sat on the board of these organizations, and so on. And just moving along, if you look at that letter, some would say, because that was signed by 99.9% African-American leaders. And so there's one group that signed on to that letter, which was the Southwest Organizing Project. And so deeper in that someday as we go through this, why did a letter come out of the Southeast that was almost 100% African-American signatures, civil rights leaders, and so on, and one Latino or Chicana organization signing on there? I'm not going to go into that. That's very, very important to the history and understanding that. And then moving right along again, another letter, as a reporter came to New Mexico to engage with us about the letter. And then they informed us of a letter that was actually is what referred to as the first letter that was sent out to international environmental and conservation groups. This letter was sent by a group, a coalition of indigenous sisters and brothers from South America, challenging international conservation and environmental groups, saying, who gave you the right to come to the table with governments and so on and make decisions about our land and so on. That's very, very, very important in our history. So moving along, then you would see several letters and then another letter. Then here comes another letter. So we said, okay, well, let's send a letter to what was referred to as our friendly groups, Greenpeace and some of the other organizations that weren't really identified as part of the group of 10. And we sent them to a letter and said, all respect, sisters and brothers, we want you to understand something, that at the end of the day, the question is, matter in fact, are you tokenizing us? Are you inviting us to Washington, D.C. to participate or to testify in Congress or otherwise? And is it purely around photo ops? At the end of the day, who then in fact is sitting at the table making decisions for much of the work that you're doing that's been impacting our lives? That's very, very, very important for us to understand in terms of this history. I will say, moving quickly along, that there was some responses to what's referred to as a letter to the group of 10, but it was somewhat, we understand that you folks have been real busy working on housing issues, on health issues, unemployment, and on and on and on and on in this process. And so you've been busy. So we've sent you a letter, or we text you or emailed you, or we did whatever, but you didn't respond. And it's what we said to many of the folks is that you cannot discuss the question of environmental and economic justice without the participation, the full participation, and those sisters and brothers that represent us, and we choose our own leaders who represents us at those tables when those decisions are being made. Whether it's rural communities, whether it's urban communities, whether it's farm worker issues, whether it's native indigenous issues, or whatever it may be. That's very, very, very important to us. I'm gonna move along, and I wanted to just remind those that are on this phone around the first Earth Summit that took place in Rio, in Brazil. We did a pre-PEP, I remember very clearly, the conference calls and so on that were taking place, preparing our people to attend the first Earth Summit. That's very, 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 very important throughout the history of the environmental and economic justice movement. I'm giving just little dabbles of what this history really is. The other one is the Women's Conference that took place in China. We organized a delegation of women of color that represented our self-interest in China and the self-interest of our sisters and brothers throughout this country and throughout the world. So that's very, very important. I also just want to, moving along, I just want to identify another letter. A letter that was sent by Dana Austin and Ann Bastian from the New World Foundation. Because in this interaction, all this discussions that's taking place and us getting to know each other and understanding how these issues impact on all of us. Then a letter was sent by Ann Bastian and Dana Austin It was an open letter to the funders saying you need to put resources back in the hands of those sisters and brothers that statistics are being used for, and so on, for people writing proposals, for people getting grants without the participation. So we say this again today with respect to many of our colleagues in the funding world. Put the resources back in the hands of those that have been not only making this history throughout these years, but those that have been most of the highest impacted people. And that's all of us, including poor white communities and so on. So I want to just, I get kind of excited, as you can see, because as I finish this up, I just want to tell you, I just want to say something to you from the closeness of my heart. Here in Los Jardines, we, like many of you, we have been losing our people on a, I would say, week by week basis, but I would be giving it an injustice, on a day by day basis, because not only of the virus, but the health inequities and the health racism that's been taking place in these health systems throughout this country. That's very, very, very important. These issues that we're talking about have impacted not only us before the virus came. I'm talking about many, many years before the virus of racism itself, and the impact of institutional and institutional racism that our people have been imposed by and imposed on. So I just want to say to you that I, in all honesty, in the world, would hope, and please, 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 sisters and brothers, as we came out of Washington, D.C., we speak for ourselves. We're very capable of speaking for ourselves, and we will continue speaking for ourselves throughout this process. So as I kind of close out and give this last few minutes comments, I honestly have to say, let's not go backward, but in saying that, we have to look at all of this history that we're talking about. Yes, let's go forward, but in that forwardness, at the end of the day, in that forwardness to us, don't make life more intentionally or unintentionally difficult for us for what we're already going through. We look forward to saying this. I say we just lost a sister here that's been very, very important to us. It's a leader in Los Jardines Institute. And yesterday we lost a family member of another volunteer here at Los Jardines. Every week, every day of the week has been very challenging and difficult situations. So I'm going to leave it there. And as I say to you, we can talk about our own history. We very clearly, those of us that have participated in making that history possible, we do very well for speaking for ourselves. And so based upon that, I'm looking forward, we're looking forward to working and coalescing and aligning. The word alignment is very, very, very important to us. It's not just a catchword. Can we sit, sisters and brothers, at the table? Can we sit, sisters and brothers, as people of color, as poor working class communities? Can we sit, sisters and brothers, with scientists, with doctors? Can we sit with our ally organizations to develop and align around things that we may not necessarily all agree on at the same time, but there is those moments in this history where we can come to some alignment. So again, I thank you all for letting me speak for these few moments. And I will say we would be more than happy to also, we're coordinating along with Dr. Martinez and the staff at the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy of developing the people's history of the environmental justice movement. Love you all. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to speak. And we will never go backward. We will always go forward, and with all respect and love, and for the love of our communities. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Richard. Amazing as always. I'm getting a lot of chats in here. I'm getting a lot of questions in the chat in message to me, Richard, about when you're going to write a book. You got to write a memoir and write down all this history, everyone says. So we'll look forward to that in 2021. Thank you so much, Richard. Next up, we have another amazing environmental justice leader who I have the pleasure to work with, Michele Roberts. Michele is the other national co-coordinator of the Environmental Justice Health Alliance, EJHA. She's spent the past many years assisting communities with advocacy and technical support concerning the impacts of toxics on their health and the environment. Michele is, I know she would want me to say, a proud graduate of Morgan State University. She also received her master's degree from the University of Delaware. She worked for about 20 years as an environmental scientist for the government before she became a full-time professional environmental justice advocate, not that she wasn't doing that work before. Michele also has combined her passion for community leadership and art by co-creating the Art Slam at Sam program at her home church of the Episcopal Church of St. Andrew and Matthew in our mutual hometown of Wilmington, Delaware. So thank you, Michele. And I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll kick it over to Cecilia after that, Dr. Martinez.
Thank you so very much, Stephanie, and thank you, everyone. It is really a pleasure to be with all of you, and it is so hard to follow my dear twin brother, Richard Moore. And we really are twins, actually, born on the same day. He is the younger twin to me, he often refers to. But I want to take us, this is a very exciting and rewarding opportunity for us right now with the Environmental Justice Health Alliance. You heard who we are, and many of our communities are what we call legacy communities. And when we say legacy, our legacies, as you heard Richard speak to the various issues that we have been impacted by, our legacies steep back to that of forced migration, slavery, occupations of folks' lands and other things, all of the things that we're still engaged with today. So our legacies have taken us into today. We, as you heard Richard and his presentation, as he said, we speak for ourselves. After the first People of Color Summit, which I did not have the privilege of being in attendance at, but I was in the privilege of being at the second People of Color Summit. But what is very important is the fact that principles were created. And not only these principles, solutions that people had. And then as we began to really see the disconnects in our governmental structures, as we know that are systemically connected to that of systemic racism, then those disconnects included everything from housing to health to our wellness. And now comes the Industrial Revolution, bringing all of these different industries and the lack of regulatory processes that really spoke to what our communities needed. So as you heard from Richard, the disconnects between that of the quote conservation groups and what was impacting our communities on the ground. I'm originally from Wilmington, Delaware, and for us that is very important because that was the chemical capital of the world. Equally, I am a scientist. That too is important. As they say, there's no blacks in science, and then there's us. And what we mean by that is we come from the science that know what the harm and then what this thing called the precautionary piece is. And so what we in the Environmental Justice Health Alliance encountered this collective and collaborative, this very strategic partnership with a network called Coming Clean. And the folks within Coming Clean looked towards, together, we began to create, based on the precautionary principles, the process of what's called now today the Louisville Charter for Safer Chemicals. That is a very important piece for our communities, because as we looked at over time, the struggles between that of toxic racism, we came to find that not only, as you heard Richard say, the slaughterhouses, the dump sites, and all of these things were in our communities, but in addition to that, what was equally in our communities were these high-risk facilities, and high-risk facilities in abundance. And you all may recall what happened in Bhopal, India. Some may not have recalled because some of you may not have been born. But in Bhopal, India, where they had that very toxic explosion, and people by the tens of thousands died and are still struggling with that issue. Well, since that time, our United States, and that was a United States company, W.R. Grace, that was responsible for that. But to this from that point, through several congressional leaderships and series of presidential administrations, there was a lack in a will to address the impacts of high hazards and chemicals and how that would impact our community. Then we move into what we call the climate conversation. And this climate conversation speaks to that of a carbon-centric way of addressing, and a market base to address how we will address our climate crisis. But we're not taking into account that we've had failed toxic chemical policies that have not, Union Carbide, my apology, not W.R. Grace, Union Carbide was the actual corporation. But you see, all of these corporations are actually surrounding our communities by the abundance. And what we fail to have are strong chemical policies that really protect our communities against the high hazards of explosion, the ongoing impacts of health disparities, the impacts to their education, and all of these things. So hence we wrote together a demographic analysis called Who's in Danger? Race, Poverty, and Chemical Disasters. What we found from that is that, yet again, Blacks, 75% greater than the American public at risk, living fenced line to these high risk facilities. Latinos, Latinx, 60% greater than that of the US population as a whole, living fence line to these communities. In addition to that, there are schools. You heard what Richard said, how we redefined what environmental justice, what environmentalism is. So therefore you have their schools, their playgrounds, their faith community. All of these are fence line to these very high risk facilities. And in addition to that, we are talking about a climate crisis, but not addressing a disasters crisis that could really fully compromise these communities. We're looking at market-based fixes. And so our communities went deep into holding firm and fast that we must have real reform in our chemical policies. There's no way that we should be able to have policies that speak to allowing certain communities to be at risk. We need what's called the systems change, a systems change that looks at our cumulative impacts, on our communities. Those cumulative impacts that date back not only to that of our historical trauma of slavery, forced migration, and all of these other pieces, but the negative externalities that came along with it, and the fact that this country has refused to, as a whole, address racial and economic injustice. So therefore, it is important for us to be able to make sure that these pieces are married together. It is important to make sure that even these market fixes, what people say market fixes, are able to not put people in further harm's way. They are supposed to address how it is that we can lift people out of the challenges they have. So until we are really looking at real reform with our chemical policies, there's no way that you can disconnect that from a climate conversation in order for us to talk about how it is that we move together having a healthy and whole economy and a healthy and whole planet that makes sure that the very least of these are protected. We came together with the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy because of the fact that we saw in a particular piece, as folks continue to talk about we needed a carbon fix, we continue to think about how it is these chemical facilities, how is it that we're addressing the emissions reductions coming from these facilities? And what is the demand of these facilities on that of our processes? We learned that while many are telling your communities to change a light bulb, and that will help with the climate crisis, or just swap out your stove or all of these things, we learned that the actual chemical-based facilities are sucking the life out of the water, sucking the life out of the utility. So while they're making it yet again, on the actual community or the person, it is not a lifestyle fix to change this crisis. We need the moral, courageous will to go deep within our policies to make sure that the very least of these are protected and that no community is left behind. And so with that, we're working together with the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy, and have engaged in this process to look towards how it is we address an equitable and just way to not only fix and address legacy pollution harms, but equally address the climate crisis with an effort to moving forward of having a more holistic energy policy that encompasses all of us. With that, I will leave it there and pass it on to our dear Dr. Cecilia Martinez.
Great, thank you so much, Michele. And thank you to Dr. Cecilia Martinez for joining us in her very, very busy schedule. I don't know how she does it, or any of you guys, to be honest. Dr. Cecilia Martinez is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy, or SEED. Dr. Martinez previously held positions in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Energy at the University of Delaware and at the American Indian Policy Center. She's led projects to address sustainable development at the local up to the international level. Similar to, like I said with Richard, I really could not even begin to name all of the different awards and boards that she's a part of because it would take up all of her time. Her research is focused in the development of energy and environmental strategies that promote equity and sustainable policies. She's also, in addition to being a key leader of the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform process, is on the leadership team for the National EJHA and Science Initiative. So with that, Dr. Martinez?
Thank you, Stephanie. It's really an honor to be here, and it's really an honor to follow both Richard and Michele in terms of being able to, work alongside them and also share some of the work that we've been working on together. Also, a huge thank you to PSR-LA. You all are doing incredible work, have been for quite some time, and it really is thankful. I'm very thankful to be able to help to participate in this session with Martha and Paula. I'm just going to start with a little bit of background. My background is in climate and energy policy, but we co-founded the Center for Earth, Energy, and Democracy because we knew that a lot of the policy analysis and capacity building information that environmental justice communities need is not at their disposal. It's not accessible. And oftentimes national organizations come ready-made with their policy solutions or with their analysis and to EJ communities. And we felt that was already a step too far. And what we wanted to do is provide our communities with the best information so that they could make their own decisions and assess the strategies that were being brought to them. And that's exactly how the partnership, in one way, began with Environmental Justice Health Alliance. With being involved in the climate and energy field, we were very aware that that field is incredibly siloed. It's a very technical field that really just focused on carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. But it also, in working with EJHA and several of our environmental justice friends and colleagues, we also knew that there was this other very dangerous sector called the petrochemical industry that was doing great harm to communities with respect to chemical security in terms of accidents, in terms of normal pollution emissions, not necessarily greenhouse gases. But very little in terms of the field in those two sectors were really coming together. In other words, the climate and energy sector was not really looking at the petrochemical sector in terms of the harm that it was doing on EJ communities. And then the petrochemical folks who are working on the petrochemical or chemical security issues were not necessarily fully informed about the climate and energy approaches. So we came together to look at that issue. How do they connect? And of course, it was very clear how they connect, not just in terms of the issues that Michele and Richard have already cited, but in terms of how much and how dangerous a sector and an industry, the chemical and petrochemical industry, is in contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And that's not the only thing. They also contribute to a whole lot of dangerous other pollution emissions. But we found that, in fact, when you start breaking it down, they are an incredibly growing, fast-growing sector, not just in the US, as you all who are working on this area know, but they are an incredibly fast-growing sector globally. Which means every time we focus on greenhouse gas emissions in the power plant sector or in the transportation sector, we're missing a very important piece in the petrochemical sector, as they are a fast-growing, probably the faster growing sector in terms of GHG emissions. Just to give you an idea, in 2019, the life cycle for plastics in terms of CO2 emissions was about equivalent to 189 coal plants. That's just in the plastics production. By the time, if we look at the projected growth in 2050, that will equal approximately 615 coal plants. So if we do not address this situation, we are not going to be addressing the climate change issue. Now, I also want to say very specifically that, a lot of climate strategy is about now dealing with industrial processes In other words, that they're trying to figure out ways how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in industry. And the petrochemical industry will be a significant actor in that and a recipient of research and development dollars in terms of incentives to try and reduce their GHG emissions. Here's where it becomes very important for us to be connected with our EJ colleagues, because unless we take the whole package, like Michele said, in cumulative impacts, if we only focus on making these facilities more efficient in terms of their energy consumption and their GHG emissions, what we are going to miss is the other types of pollution emissions that they are emitting in our communities. And that's why it is so important for environmental justice folks and climate folks to work together so that we don't end up in a worse situation for communities with respect to other pollutants. Which brings me very quickly, I want to go into how then we have been able to work and build off of the incredible environmental justice history work that Richard was talking about into developing a national just and equitable climate platform. Let me just say that that the tensions that Richard articulated were very strong. They were even more strong in the climate arena when in 2008 to 2010, a lot of the legislation that was being put forward for climate was happening. National groups basically left the environmental justice community behind in their policy proposals. And so we were at odds. What we ended up doing in 2018 was trying to bring together national organizations and EJ coalitions together to see if we could actually engage a conversation about how to develop a national climate agenda that would have equity and justice at its center and its foundation. Something that would have never been done before in this country, and something that national environmental organizations themselves had abandoned in the 2008 to 2010 time period when they were promoting climate legislation. And so we spent a year together. We've spent an intense year together discussing what the issues are, discussing where we're at, and discussing how we might be able to formulate an agenda. And I'm happy to say that in 2019, in June of 2019, we were able to align around an inclusive and just climate agenda together. Groups and organizations like NRDC, Earth Justice, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, Union of Concerned Scientists, as well as EJ coalitions like Environmental Justice Health Alliance, New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, the Midwest Environmental Justice Network, and a host of others signed on the dotted line on this national climate agenda. What was truly remarkable and innovative about this, as I said before, is it's the first time that justice and equity was at the focus. But it was also a highly intersectoral climate agenda. We did not focus purely on CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions. We were not carbon centric because we all understood, and this was the EJ perspective, that we need to look at these issues in an intersectoral way. That we can't address climate change without addressing self-healthy communities and their infrastructure. We cannot address climate change without addressing economic diversity and community wealth building. We cannot address climate change without addressing cumulative impacts and legacy pollution. We cannot address climate change without discussing healthy air quality across EJ communities. We cannot address climate change without addressing displacement, relocation, and the right to return in terms of what's happened to our communities. In other words, a foundational principle of our climate agenda is that no community would be left behind. And we're happy to say that that climate agenda has propelled us into a whole new world of legislative activity in terms of electoral politics, elevated and our communities are being engaged in a real way now. not only by national organizations, but by congressional leaders and by others. And so I think this is an example of why we need to work together. Physicians, scientists, EJ communities, EJ coalitions, all need to work together to inform each other and build a better policy agenda for all of us. And so with that, I will close, Stephanie, and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martinez. That was wonderful. We're going to come back to this at the end, but I believe Rahel dropped the link in the chat, and we will drop it again in the chat to read the full Equitable and Just National Climate Platform at ajustclimate.org. And we are going to definitely encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to check out the platform and also sign your organizations on as an endorser of the platform. Sorry, that was, you were under time. I was the timer. So with that, we're going to give everyone a couple of minutes, I think, Paula, is that right? To take a quick break, you know, stretch your legs, use the restroom, grab a drink, whatever you need, and then come back. And what do you think, Paula?
5 minutes is fine.
5 minutes.
Yes. We're going to have a quick bio break. And by the time we come back, we're going to have breakout rooms ready for you so that we can go into in-depth conversations about what was just shared, any feelings, thoughts that you had throughout the presentations. And there will be more space for that. So let's go ahead and take a quick 5-minute break. And by the time we come back, we'll have more instructions about how to join the breakout groups.
I just wanna be your medicine. I just wanna be your medicine. Yeah. When it rains, it pours. When you're in danger, I just wanna be your medicine. Yeah. I just wanna.
All right, everyone. Sorry to cut the song a little early. It was on loop, so hopefully you got to hear that beautiful song. I really like that powerful song. So I hope everybody's back. I've already set up the rooms. If you have any questions, let me know. But I'm gonna go ahead and open the rooms. If for some reason you are still not linking up your phone and your computer audio and you get split up, you can put it on the chat and I'll make sure to put you in the right room. So just let me know if you have any questions. So for the breakout rooms, each of the speakers are gonna have a room, and we're gonna have really in-depth conversations and meaningful conversations about the meaning of the different presentations and the different grounding presentations that we had. And so these are the prompts for the breakout groups. So the first one is like, it's what do you see are the goals and actions that you can take to achieve environmental justice? And the second one is, how do we more meaningfully address the intersections of our work of environmental justice, toxic threats, and climate injustice? And in a more simplified way, if you're working on climate change or on toxics, how are you going to include toxics or climate change respectively in your work? So if I'm gonna also drop these questions on the chat, so you can have them available as you're going into your breakout groups. But if you have any questions, you can drop it on the chat and we will address it as soon as possible. So I'm gonna open the rooms. Our speakers, are you all ready? Are we good to go?
Oh, Paula, before we do that, I think everyone should try to turn on their video.
Oh, that's right. Yes. To have a more engaging conversation, everybody can, we gave you permission to go ahead and start your video.
Can we?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Can we unmute everyone? Sorry for my tech.
Yeah, we can. We can unmute everybody before that. Rahel, you just give me a cue when it's ready. Is it good to go?
Oh no, I'm still asking folks to
Oh.
unmute. I think are folks able to just unmute themselves?
Yeah.
If you are, please go ahead and do so.
Add that. Okay. I just made it, I think, so that everyone can unmute yourself.
There we go.
Okay, great.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
Yep, now it is.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so I'm gonna open the rooms, and if you have any questions, let me know.
Okay.
Okay, good luck. I'll paste the questions on the chat so you can have them available.
Okay.
Is it going to be obvious how do we go into a room, Paula?
Yes.
Those of us that are stupid.
You will be sent directly to the room.
Going to the Twilight Zone.
You can go ahead and click join the room.
Someone else refers to. Love you, Corey. Love you, Corey. And you got that shit.
Starting to cook. So I guess I'll just choose two groups in the interest of time, maybe just two that would like to report back. I just wanted to see if anybody maybe Martha's group, Michele's group. Go ahead, Michele.
I can report back. Our group was very robust. It was, for the most part, many people found that they needed to take onus on themselves and diving deeper to learn more and incorporate more of our EJ history and struggles into their works, especially since many who were in our group, some came through trainings and educational spaces, if you will, academic spaces that spoke more and taught more on the environmental side, but did not include that of the social justice issues and what have you. So many people felt that it was their responsibility to be able to do so. But then in addition to that, we equally had someone where one of our science folks was saying that they felt as though it was important to go to the community even before bringing the science, making sure that they heard from the community what the community need, and then be able to share the science and to together they work together on these issues. And then just very last, a couple of our folks were people who worked in administrative and supportive roles like that of logistics, development, and what have you, and found that they too needed to make sure that they are grounded to be able to better to, in the logistics space, for example, support communities and meet them where they are with respect to their ways in which to be supportive, but in the development space, be able to understand that our community narratives and voices need to be supported and respected, and that therefore there should be up in these narratives, and so that they make sure that they utilize this to help in pushing back or even advancing that narrative of EJ with respect to development spaces. So I'll just leave it there. But it was a very good and robust conversation that we had, and many people found that they are excited and do need to go further, and that this was so far helpful for them in taking them deeper into their work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that report back. Anyone else would like to report very quickly, briefly?
I wish to report, but Martha got cut off in an important comment she was making. I'd like to hear the rest of it.
Of course.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I was speaking of our experience as an organization and being that it took, you know, building trust, consistent, learning to show up with humility and not try to lead. But the other part is, you know, I was in a very unique position. Often I'm the one who went and had the confrontations with our frenemies about what was going on, because I lived in both worlds, you know, lived in the environmental justice world. That's where my heart and soul was. And then I worked with a lot of the bigger organizations who got the big grants, who defined the policy agenda. And so, and I have to say, it has taken, I did it, it was important to do, but it takes a deep, profound emotional toll to be the person who has to deal with the tsunami of microaggressions and of disrespect and devaluing and man and women splaining and all of those things that it took to win a seat at the policy table.
Thank you very much, Marta. So I appreciate all of the report backs. Thankful for the space. Hopefully we can have more of this conversation as the time comes in the future. I'm going to continue on to our agenda for today. So next for our keynote speaker is Jose Bravo with the Just Transition Alliance, who is a longtime leader on just transition, climate justice, and chemicals policy as they relate to communities fighting for environmental justice and labor justice, organized and unorganized. He was born in Mexico and brought to the United States as a child. Jose's work in social justice issues is rooted in his upbringing in the Southern California avocado fields, alongside both his parents. Since 1991, Jose has gained recognition as a national and international leader in both the environmental justice and climate justice movements. And over the past years, as a community organizer, Jose has worked on numerous campaigns in the US, Puerto Rico, and in Mexico. So with that, I'll pass it to Jose, and just a quick reminder for everybody to please turn off your videos to make sure that we spotlight the video of our keynote speaker and we minimize any connectivity issues. Thank you very much. Jose, I think great. Yes.
I'm trying to unmute. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, Thank you, everyone, for inviting us. Thank you, PSR-LA. Thank you, Environmental Justice and Health Alliance, and all the other partners that made this possible. We heard a lot today already about what's going on, what has gone on, what are some of the historical context of how a movement was formed. And I want to mention the fact that, Richard said something about environmental and economic justice. We've always felt that our economy is tied to our environment. It's because of corporate greed that our environment is the way that it is. And we're having to put up with the disproportionate impacts in communities of color, indigenous communities, and low-income communities. I also wanted, to talk about just recovery, as from a just transition point of view, and just recovery. Today I put on Facebook about something about just recovery, and that is that the Sierra Club should be leading the fight to rename places away from John Muir, who literally was a racist, and returning those places back to their origins and the people that that for time immemorial had lived in those communities and in those forests and stuff. I say that because that would be a just recovery. And if there's anything owed to those people because of their ancestral lands being taken away, then the Sierra Clubs needs to fess up on that. So we'll move on with this just recovery piece as well, talking about contamination and pollution, and literally the legacy of damage to our health, our environment, our people that this has left behind. So when we talk about just recovery, it's not just recovery to make money from a green economy. It's just recovery of our health and our environment, and making sure that when monies are put together to move towards a just recovery, they include cleaning up the toxic waste and many other things that are plaguing our communities. So let me see if I can get out of, I want to see that slide that's up there somewhere. Can everybody see that? Can somebody put that slide?
Which slide?
The one that was just on my screen on the little tiny piece, which is the life cycle of plastics.
Oh, it's right there.
Okay, so everybody can see that? I can't see that. I need to see it.
I see it.
Okay. All right. I see it, but in very little. I need to see it in very big because I'm blind.
Oh, sorry.
Do full screen.
Yes, full screen.
Are you seeing a lot of people's pictures? Maybe there's like a...
I'm seeing my picture and a little tiny picture of that slide.
There might be in the top corner, like a square with a smaller square in it.
There it is. I get it. I got it. Hey, all right. See, not only Richard Moore is learning about this technology, so am I. All right.
Great.
So this is a life cycle of plastics, and you could literally talk about the life cycle of plastics and take the word plastics out and put lead. You could put chromium. You could put a bunch of other things that are plaguing our communities, BPA, many, many things. But I wanted to talk a little bit about life cycle of plastics. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I attended a meeting with folks that are working around plastics issues. And part of their work was around taking straws out of Starbucks, removing some of the plastic containers. That needs to be done. But we have to delve a little bit deeper into the impacts of plastics. So when we talk about plastics, a lot of those plastics are derived from oil. So there's the extraction piece, as you see at the bottom. where most of those extractions are in indigenous communities and or impact indigenous communities with pipelines, the actual refining process as well, and many of our communities also. So that extraction of oil then is converted into chemicals that's then made into plastic. I don't need to remind people on this call whose community that happens in. It happens in people of color communities, indigenous communities, and low-income communities. From there, where are the plastics made? In many instances, they're made overseas in other communities, and we shift the burden from the global north, us, to the global south in many instances, and or into other communities internationally. The transportation of plastics and the chemicals to make plastic and the oil and other things also impact our communities. And then in some instances, these plastics come back as products that are sold in dollar stores. So when we talk about the impact of a piece of plastic, we can start seeing that there's multiple impacts here that are not being taken into consideration, in many instances, just focusing on straws. I'm not saying people shouldn't focus on straws, but I'm saying that there needs to be a deeper dive. Then consumers, you know, in the United States, we as consumers are disproportionately people of color impacted by a lot of products that contain chemicals. I say that because white communities can literally buy their way out of danger. Some of those supermarkets that sell the non-dangerous products are not in our community. They're in middle class, upper class communities, and people have that way of being able to buy their way out of danger. And then the plastic comes back to our communities, and you see people advocating for recycling facilities in our communities. You see people advocating for incineration, waste to energy processes, which are false solutions, by the way. And then when we talk about plastics in the ocean, you know, at that meeting, I saw that there are 5 gyres on the planet. That means there's these 5 giant accumulations of plastics in the ocean. And, you know, that kind of drives the message home that our dependency on plastic is disproportionate, but at the same time not sustainable. But diving deeper into that is the fact that there are communities, primarily indigenous communities, that live on subsistence fishing, and that's their only source in many instances is to fish. That's their only source of protein that they have. So we need to look at more of this. So I'll switch on to the next slide, please. I think there was 2. Yes. So the legacy of chemicals. These are some of the legacy chemicals that we've been talking about since the environmental justice movement has started. Chemicals such as lead, heavy metal. Lead impacts our communities disproportionately. What has been the response by governments to the lead impact in our community? When a child starts acting erratically, having learning disabilities, it's to put him in on classes, put him or her in classes to special education classes. And now we're seeing that, you know, I don't know if Richard and other folks will remember this, but years ago, we had a meeting with the Mothers of East LA 25 years ago, and there was a scientist that came to us and said, hey, we're finding that there's a lot of people in prison that have a lot of lead in their blood. And he was trying to figure out a correlation to that. We had a lot of other things going on. We didn't listen, but you start seeing some of that data coming now where people are talking about that a lot of people in prison have lead in their blood. So Chrome 6, legacy chemical, plating shops, where are they? Are they in Beverly Hills? No. So PCBs, this was original. You know, this is like burnt oil that's put into our communities. It's sometimes deposited in toxic waste landfills, which are in our communities as well. And then BPA, bisphenol A, and pesticides. Pesticides are legacy chemicals that give forever. That means that they're bioaccumulative in our bodies, and they bioaccumulate and they don't go away. And you have whole communities that are being impacted by these chemicals as we speak. So when we talk about a just recovery, you see the amplitude of processes that need to be put in place in order to deliver us from these toxic impacts. Because it doesn't make sense to me to move forward with the fact that we're wanting to develop a green economy while leaving those communities in harm's way with the legacy that has been caused by chemicals and energy. And somebody had mentioned that chemicals are also, also use a great amount of energy. In 2018, the figures were that they're the second user of energy on the planet. And I'm not talking about industries all over the world. I'm talking about industries here in the United States, chemical industries in Cancer Alley, chemical industries in New Jersey, chemical industries in the Alameda corridor here in Los Angeles. So we have to talk about a just transition away from these things. And I think we've moved away, really we have moved away from toxic use reduction, that's where we need to go. Pollution prevention, precautionary principles, that means err on the side of health, and then best management practices. So that means that if you, instead of applying pesticides, can grow things organically, as many of our communities are doing, then ultimately that's where we need to go. And then I want to move on to the last piece here, is that we got to watch out. In our little breakout group here, we got to watch out that, because in the environmental justice movement, I think we have to do more to bring in workers that work inside some of those dangerous plants. The Just Transition Alliance has been doing this for years, but when we talk about something being nasty in a plant and dangerous and chemical laden, workers are at the front line, and that chain link fence at the industry, at the side of the industry, is not protecting our communities. It will never protect our communities. And I don't care if Chevron puts trees up like they did in Richmond. The exposure to chemicals is greater in that way. So we have to also talk about the fact that globalized economies are failures. How? They're failing our planet and they're failing our health. They're impacting us and they're impacting many other people in other countries, and the United States is shifting a burden primarily on the global South. So we must come together with workers, and I'm not talking just about organized workers. I'm talking about people, day labor. I'm talking about people that take care of children, people that clean houses. I'm talking about folks that need to be part of this process. So I see that Paula's telling me that I have 1 more minute, and I'll beat it by saying thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jose. That was wonderful. There's a lot of questions for you, Jose, in the chat. So we're gonna allow for questions for 1 more minute. And I think Andrea Ventura says, how do we ensure that best practices actually lead to improvements instead of setting us up for a model where if you do X, Y, or Z, you're good even if they don't work.
So one way, Andrea, is making sure that those best management practices and best practices and are directed by those that are most affected, not by those that are going to make the most money.
Thank you so much, Jose. I think we're gonna leave more questions for the end. But for now, I'm gonna continue on to, thank you so much, Jose, for everything. You are as well my mentor, so I'm gonna introduce this to our next mentor, our next keynote speaker, Marta Di Naruelo, who is my mentor, and I'm really honored to work with her at PSR-LA. For the past 35 years, she has been the executive director of PSR-LA, and for 11 years, sorry, and has committed 20 years to PSR-LA through being an ally to the environmental justice movement. She has worked on public health issues, has worked for the Ministry of Health in Nicaragua in the late 80s, and has been part of the LA social justice community for most of her life. She has also served in the nonprofit sector as an advocate, community organizer, and coalition builder. And she has dedicated her career to the need for local grassroots advocacy to work in partnerships with statewide policy actions. So honored to be here with you, Marta, and take it away.
Great. How is everybody? I just still see Jose, so I'm not sure how to, anyway, that's fine. So this is actually really exciting, and we want to do more of this because it's such a great opportunity, one, to actually see all my colleagues and allies. And so Californians for a Green and Healthy Economy, we're actually, Jose Bravo and myself started this organization. And we started it because in California, there'd been a long history of toxics advocacy that often wasn't centered on environmental justice. And I will talk a little bit about what that means. So next slide. So stop here. This is, so what we did with the Change Coalition is that I'd been, my background in public health, and I came to work at Physicians for Social Responsibility. So I tended to try to bring in more of our health allies. So one of the things that we were able to do is create a partnership and a discussion between the reproductive justice community and the environmental justice community about how our issues intersect. And this was about 15 years ago when the term intersectionality was relatively new. But that was a really important cross-movement partnership that brought the voices of women and how we're impacted particularly by toxins, and that as an issue of justice, women have a right to be born, to use the products that we use and not be exposed, right? Because we're exposed through the personal products. But it's what really sort of led to this ongoing frustration that I was feeling. Next slide. As we did toxics policy, it was whack-a-mole, go after this chemical, go after BPA, go after flame retardants. And it is this, that's how the movement worked, right? We started with DDT and Silent Spring, and then the Clean Air Act. And it's important to remember that in the Clean Air Act, there was a grandfather clause that allowed certain chemicals to not be part of the regulation. So, and it's important to remember that the term grandfather in and of itself is a racist term that comes from our history of slavery. And so, white supremacy and racism are embedded in so much of how we think about policy. Next slide. And so I'm going to go through really quickly these, and you can have access to these because they're kind of cool. So in 1972, we banned DDT. Nevertheless, most of us will still have DDE or the breakdowns of that DDT in our bodies. Women will have that in their breast milk because it stays around for a huge amount of time, right? It's one of these forever chemicals, along with the new forever chemicals that we're finding, and mercury. And as I said earlier, there's the link between climate and chemicals that all folks have also taught, that everyone already has talked about is this, that as the polar ice caps melt, many of these embedded chemicals, because they bioaccumulate, and the higher you move up, you know, to they're in the ice, they melt, and then they become bioavailable for our water and eventually for our food stream. And so it's incredibly important to remember that the canaries in the coal mine are not the polar bears. They are the people who rely on subsistence fishing and traditional practices that are eating higher up on the food chain, because that's a traditional practice, and these chemicals are overly concentrated. Next slide. I'm going to go through these really quickly. As you could see, you know, we had the environmental justice movement, the creation of this, all of these voluntary programs like the High Production Chemical Challenge Program, the creation of the EPA, the creation of state EPAs like Cal EPA in 1999. Yet we have no more protections than we do today. And that is in partly because it was not centered on justice, and two, as Monique Hardin from Louisiana says, none of our environmental laws were actually designed to protect health. They are designed to give the rules of the game to industry, what's permissible to permit, you know, this is how much we're going to allow you to poison people, but you have to stay within your permit. So next slide. We've got the Healthy Schools Act that mandated notification of pesticides. That was actually one of my big first policy campaigns when I came to PSR the year before. And it was a huge lesson in how Sacramento politics works. Keep going. And yes, the slides will be available for folks. Then we began to work on flame retardants. We worked on wet cleaning and transitioning away from dry cleaning. And all this time, keep going, just move through the slides as I talk, because you know, you can have them and look at them later. I was becoming increasingly more skeptical about the approach we were taking to chemicals. As I learned more and dug deep into the precautionary principle, into concepts of life cycle assessment, the idea of a cradle-to-cradle economy, when I looked at the ideas that were coming out of movement generation about a regenerative economy, and you know, working on campaigns like the BPA campaign, where what we needed to do is protect women, but because of the power of the industry, we ended up, you know, falling back to let's take it out of baby bottles. And then what ended up happening was that BPS was put in it, and that's, you know, BPA's evil twin, or evil cousin, as we say in the Toxies, that we were just playing whack-a-mole. We were playing at the margins of all of these, and we were creating dual markets. As more consumers became aware of BPA and flame retardants, the market met their needs. But that market was not the market that we were working in, or that is centered on justice, right? So, and then you started to see in low-income communities BPA-free products, but they were not free of toxic chemicals. They had BPS. They'd been reformulated. So we kept having this problem like, oh, if I work on the consumer end, well, what about the disposal end? Will those products end up in a 99-cent store? Will they end up in a landfill? Next slide. So these, all of, you know, so in 2014, we sort of said, yeah, let's shift how we work on things. And we continue to work on policy, but we really wanted to begin to talk about these issues together, right? And envisioning a regenerative economy where we were not using market-based solutions, and actually talking about both detoxify, decarbonize, and the need to build more democratic systems for decision making. Next slide. Try to slow down because I don't know how much more time I have. So, you know, this is sort of the things that we've here. Keep going to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the things, an example of where good, well-intentioned energy policy clashes with the reality of toxics. So there's lots of efforts to decarbonize buildings and to talk about the health impacts of natural gas indoors as a way of saying, you know, communities should move away from natural gas appliances, which we all agree. We want to get to zero emission. We would like to focus on the big sources like trucks and automobiles and move them to zero emissions, so that those that communities that live along those goods movement lines and near ports are protected first. Nevertheless, we do have to move to a future where gas is not embedded in our homes. So well-meaning advocates came up with a plan to, you know, by 20 whatever, all homes will be electric, and we're going to transition to using induction stoves. And right now, and so, well, some of the challenges that we have found, well, how do you get those in rental units? What's the cost? And then in talking to people who had made the transition and other of our allies, and because we've been working with many of our other allies around the issue of perfluorinated compounds and flame retardants, we realized, you know, you need a different set of pots and pans when you use an induction stove. How many people in our community still have Teflon coated pots and pans? What happens to the end of life of those pans? There's the cost of the pans and the cost of the stove, and then the cost of disposal. And why that matters is because our people live all along that life cycle, where PFAS is produced, where it's, you know, where it gets put into manufacturing, and where it's disposed of. So if your policy is to say you cannot put this in your product and you don't have an alternative for the disposal, that's not justice-centered policy. If you have an electrification policy that has not been vetted with low-income communities to see what the unintended consequences are, everything from gentrification to increased energy costs, then you don't have a health and justice-based policy. And those things you don't find unless you're in deep consultation and communication with communities. Unless, you know, so to me, it's stunning that energy policy around buildings is being developed by people who've never had to remodel a house, who've never had to build a house, who've actually never had to comply with the thing called Title 24 in California, which is how you meet your energy standard. How is it that mainstream environmentalists, mostly men in their suits, can actually develop a policy when they have no idea what the cost of implementation is on the ground? And why this matters is if you're going to remodel your house and you have to comply with these new things, which is wonderful, but these incur costs. And sometimes you cannot pay for those upfront costs because you're a middle-class person who's a first-generation home buyer, and that's the only access to wealth, and you may just not be able to do it. It may be $1,000, $5,000 increased cost, but that matters, and that's a barrier. And nobody is centering on the needs of renters in terms of energy policy as well. So those are some of the ways that on the ground, we are trying to move past some of these challenges. But it's going to take discipline, and not on our part, but on the part of our allies. Stop introducing policies using all your resources and privilege and access that actually aren't centered on justice. And just stop that. You know, it's easy to change the system if you just stop enabling the system. I'll stop there. I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Marta. That was wonderful. Preach it. Stephanie, did you want to continue with questions?
Sorry, I pinned the video. Couldn't get it unpinned. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we end this important training and conversation with next steps, because I think that, you know, that's where we have to go, right? We have learned so much, but we need to put this into action, and we need to make the change, right? So we're definitely going to make at least 5 minutes at the end for next steps. So we're definitely not going to get to all of the questions, I'm imagining, but if folks have some questions that you want to type in the chat, I will try to facilitate getting answers to a few of those at least. If you have a specific person that your question is to, note that in the chat, but if not, then that's okay too. Yeah, I'm seeing some really good comments in the chat. It's hard to follow that, Marta. Sorry. I think that this is I don't know if anyone wants to take a crack at this, but I do. What do we do when we don't have an end of life solution, right? That we have these forever chemicals. Oh, sorry. Jose, are you? Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I wanted to just highlight one of the comments that was made by Amy Kyle, a good friend of us, of ours, that for some of these chemicals, there's no way back. If you look at PFAS chemicals, they're on everybody's blood in the planet. They're in the water. They're in a lot of other places. And for some of these chemicals, the only way forward is to stop using them. So I wanted just to highlight Amy's comment and reminding us there is no true disposal option for PFAS chemicals. And PFAS chemicals, the Teflon coating in your pans.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Jose. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble following here. We are getting a couple of different questions as well as the comments about, and this isn't necessarily something that anyone can answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do we do when we don't have that end of life solution? We need to stop producing, obviously, these kinds of chemicals, but we already have so many of them. How do we drive the development of just policies around end of life?
Well, I think we've been thinking about this. I think one resolves around extended producer liability. You make a mess, you got to clean it up, right? So pushing more policies, building the kind of political power that we need and political will that we need for the tougher solutions. And then on the other side is the innovation part, right? How are we working with scientists and solving real life problems around disposal, around soil cleanup, so that we're not digging, hauling, and burning, and that it's attractive to run a bill. It's less fun to do the long-term work of actually partnerships with the universities, getting them to understand why they need to solve real-life problems. That's less attractive, but that's how you create, the alternatives, so we can. Otherwise, we keep coming up with problems where, in the middle of the life cycle, that may not help, right? But I think the Environmental Justice and Health Alliance and the Campaign for Healthier Solutions and some of these others have really sort of figured out, like, oh, I never thought the 99-cent store campaign would work. I really didn't. I'm like, everything they sell is toxic. But that campaign is beautiful, right? Jose and Líderes Campesinas and others bought stock. They went to the stockholder meetings. They kind of forced the owners. I mean, there's still more advocacy to be done, but they went to sort of the bottom of the market to figure out how to fix that. And that has led to other innovations. And so it's just a new way of working that we're just not used to.
Yeah, even also this, just to kick in with that, thank you for that, Martha. From the industrial chemical side, equally, we have been, EJHA has been partnering with folks like Earth Justice and Natural Resources Defense Council, looking at these chemicals like the ethylene oxide and these medical sterilizers, and how it is that there are safer alternatives for that. And because of the relationships that we have built one with the other, and then that relationship with that of the equitable and just climate process, then it drives that force to really look at how we really need to have a fundamental systems change, and looking at how we are bringing these chemicals online and what have you. And then I'll just leave it here equally to just take it a little further. That also is what, with those platform pieces, that is why those platform planks were created. And even when we looked at the legacy chemical space, coming back to Stephanie and I, with being from that great state of Delaware, oh, you trust and believe, we're actually have some folks actually having a conversation. And you may have even heard for the first time, even our community people are saying how, now this is a real early first time, but to hear the Vice President Joe Biden really publicly admit that the entire corridor there in Delaware, you talking about sins of the past, to be able to admit that entire industrial corridor is a cancer cluster. That came from the push of all of us on right here in this space, where we have been able to put all of our works together and drive that force. It's going to take ongoing educating and organizing and mobilizing, but we can do that. And I'll leave it here. The best part is for our young folks who are engaged in the sciences to make sure, and these folks are coming out strong, understanding that we do have to make those connections to social justice. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Michele. Oh, Jose, did you want to say something? Okay.
Yeah, and again, we don't have to go far. We don't need to, in many instances, hire a consultant to talk to us about what our solutions should be. I think that the fact is that we, in our head and in our communities, those solutions have to be leveraged, that already exist, have to be leveraged. And the fact is, I'll give you one clear example. With dollar stores, we've now gotten into negotiations with 2 of the major dollar stores in the United States to put locally grown produce on the shelves of those dollar stores. We're in the process of doing value-added products for shelf-stable products at the moment, but it's important to understand that these communities, they don't have any other choice in many instances than going to that dollar store and stepping into an unwarranted chemical trespass. So as we move forward, our solutions are vital. If our solution is to do away with PFAS chemicals, then we must all work on that, and we must take into consideration that there's workers that are going to be affected, but those workers, understanding the danger inherently in PFAS chemicals, would be part of the solution as well. So we just got to reach out.
We don't really have time to answer, I don't think, any more questions, but I'm just going to say this one so that if anybody wants to share information in the follow-up to this training, that so we had a question that said, thank you, Marta, for sharing the history about laws being insufficient. Do you know of existing model policies in place or proposed that are better? And so if anybody has access to any model policies or policies that have been introduced in places where you are working, either drop those in the chat, or if you could send that to Paula and myself, we will share it out with the after the follow-up from this. But we wanted to get to a couple of next steps.
I do want to say one thing while you're clearing that up, that we should think about not so much model policies because we don't have them. We haven't had the power. And we've got, some work we're doing in LA that's innovative, but it's model processes and model, you know, like Jose said, we don't need a consultant. It's actually doing the kind of deep community consultation, humble listening, and actually doing what the community tells you. Not, don't come listen and then do what you want. Do what the community tells you and figure out how to make that community dream real in policy. That's the challenge.
Yeah. The challenge and the opportunity, hopefully. Definitely the challenge. So we wanted to end here on and that was actually a perfect segue. I think that one place that we at EJHA have both of these things on the screen we've been working on for well over a year, over 2 years in the case of the platform. And truly, oh, thanks, Nikki. One example, I think, of a model process, while certainly nothing is perfect and we always need to be striving to do better, I think one example that we might give of a model process in terms of engaging advocates and community members directly is the sponsors of the Environmental Justice for All Act in the House. There's a similar piece of legislation in the Senate as well. But particularly the House, which also was very community, had a lot of community buy-in and driving. The House Natural Resources Committee Chairman, Congressman Grijalva and Congressman McEachin really led the charge on the Environmental Justice for All Act. And that piece of legislation came out of a process that was over, I think, over a year, Michele or Richard can correct me if I'm wrong, of engaging with environmental justice advocates and then bringing in environmental justice community members to a convening to come up with and buy into and put the community's words into policy, a set of principles, and then a piece of legislation, the Environmental Justice for All Act. And thank you for dropping the links in the chat, Rahel. Rocking and rolling. The House EJ bill has been introduced. It is online and they're using it if you think Zoom is confusing, which I do, the committee is using a platform called PopVox, which is somewhat user-friendly, but you know, all these online platforms. Happy to talk more offline. If folks have questions about that, feel free to contact me directly. But one thing that the committee is doing now, specifically the sponsors of the EJ bill, are encouraging people to sign up to host, encouraging, I should say, EJ community members to sign up to host a virtual roundtable in your community. These were previously going to be in person, but with the virus, they're going to be virtual via probably Zoom or a similar platform. The form is in the chat, and we can also send it out with the follow-up. And if you would like to connect with the committee staff, we can also connect you with them. But that's where you would express interest to host one of those virtual roundtables so that the policymakers, at least at the House Natural Resources Committee, can hear directly from EJ communities what folks want and need, what are the issues that we're facing, and what are the community's solutions. And then I think another kind of model process that was the model process of how to engage across more at an organizational level is, as we heard Dr. Martinez talk a good bit about, and some of our other speakers mention, the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform was a process that was a very intentional and very, I think, emotional coming together of, a very intentional and important and kind of historic coming together of some big national environmental groups, including many of those that Richard mentioned in the letter to the group of 10, some of those groups as well as others, and environmental justice groups and advocates. And if your organization has not already signed on as an endorser of the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform. That's actually very easy to do online, but if you have challenges, I could also help you with that. You just go to ajustclimate.org. You can read the platform there. There are some great videos, and you can, if you scroll down, you can endorse the platform. So those are some next steps that we wanted to leave folks with. I don't know if anyone else has a very quick next step in like 30 seconds of our speakers, but we'll also certainly send this information out in the follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that wrap up. It's really important to always end with next steps, with building unification, a stronger movement towards justice. And so we intend to have, hopefully in the future, more conversations like this. Incredibly thankful to all of you for staying with us, staying tuned, and really being present in today's meetings. I really appreciate that. A huge shout out to our movement leaders for taking the time to teach us, for us to actively listen, to learn, and make space for growth. So power to all of you, power to the leaders, and power to the movement. And with that, I think we'll end the meeting. I'd love to get a screenshot of picture of all of you together. So I can shut off my video so that you can.
Can I just say quickly?
Yes, of course.
Can we just give a huge shout out to Paula and to Stephanie for this incredible, thank you so much. You two rock.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also,
Thank you so
whoever's
much.
controlling, I'd like to activate my video for the screenshot, but I can't because all videos have been shut off.
Yes, we're going one by one. So, you know, technology is not that easy, but we're going one by one, giving you permission to do that.
Thank you.
Yes.
While we're doing that, I just want to add my thanks to all the presenters, and we love you. I love you all, and I look forward to when we can all get together and give you guys a big hug for all the work that you do, because I miss y'all.
Yay.
Amen.
Yes.
Seriously.
Yeah, I'll see everybody in the streets the day after the election.
What are we going to be doing, Steve?
With champagne or whatever it is you celebrate.
We're going to be trying to enforce election results, hopefully.
That's what we're gonna do.
Hey, you know, I want to give a shout out to Ron Curry. He's been on this web Zoom meeting. Ron was EPA administrator, regional administrator, Region 6, and a friend of the environmental justice movement, and somebody that really went out of his way to get our communities addressed. So thank you, Ron, for being on the call.
Yes, and he's really helped us move chemical disasters. Thank you, Ron.
I love you all. You guys are amazing.
Dr. Schatte.
Dr. Schatte, we
Dr.
love you.
Schatte, yay.
I love you guys. You are amazing. I'm glad Michele sent me this. I got this last night. I had to cancel 2 other Zoom meetings to be here.
Good.
But it was well worth it.
This is our sustainable development queen, you all. Yay.
Yes, and very big shout out and thank you to our awesome interpreters today.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Alexia. Thank you, Katja, Antena group. You all are so solid. Thank you.
We're going to change everything. We're going to bring safe chemical to the and on the top of the agenda.
Yes.
Yes. All right. I think everybody's got their video on. So let's try this. How about the fist up? I don't know. Power up to the people. All right. Let's try it. 3, 2, 1. All right. I'm going to have to do it again because there's a lot of people and I didn't get everybody. So give me 1 second. Ooh. Sorry. All right, next page. There's so many people. All right, power up, people.
Yes.
3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you very much. Thankful to all of you Have a wonderful Friday full of power and visioning. And I really appreciate you all. Virtual hugs. Have a wonderful Friday. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye, Michelle. Bye, Richard.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Gracias. Que estén muy bien. Gracias.
Jose.
Gracias.
Bye, Sylvia.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you.
I'll give you a call, Bill Walsh.
Bye, everyone.
I know. Isn't it cool to see Bill Walsh on there?
I got mad love for you all.
You are amazing, Michelle.
He's now in California. He lives in I think he lives down there.
Dude, his wife works for me now.
Oh, that's right.
His
That's
wife
right.
is.
All right, I'll wait. I have a call coming in now, but it's not you, Jose.
No, it's not me yet. All right, Billy. Thank you,
Hi,
everyone.
Jen, the amazing Jen Carr.
Okay,
You guys want to stay on?
Bye, Martha.
Okay, so
You're
we
like the
got-
Partridge family. What was it, that family?
I know. Now we look like the Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch.
I know.
This was amazing.
Love you all. We have to do this again.
Yes, much
Good
love
see
to
you,
everybody.
Richard.
Great
Thank
present.
We
you,
can now
Richard.
brag that we got Richard on Zoom. Paula, we have bragging rights.
Yes, we do. I love you all.
Richard.
Thank you for
Bye.
being incredible
you.
leaders, mentors. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Bye.
Richard, Michelle,
Bye.
Jose.
Hey,
Los
Richard, we'll
quiero.
talk in a little bit.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Gracias. Thank you. Bye.
You, Richard. God bless you.
God bless you, sister.
Bye. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Richard.
That's
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
1600 band.
Bye.
Wonderful.
Face.